As most of you know, I am Jeff Steinman, the author of How to Quit Working. And tonight, I'm going to share a couple things that you can do right now, a couple of really simple things that you can do today to quit working that job that you don't like and launch an amazing life of freedom through entrepreneurship. You know, and the first thing that I want to start with is there is, in our world and in our society, we have a view kind of how life is supposed to work, how life is supposed to unfold from when you're a small child all the way out to retirement. And what we generally think, the way we think it's supposed to work, and the way it does work for the most part, is that when you're a little kid, you come to school, and you learn how to do things. You learn about the 3 R's. You learn basic skills, how to tie your shoes, and all that. More and more as you get older and older, and finally get to high school. And then the career counselors come in, and you start having a conversation about, well, what do you think you want to do with your life? And really what that means is how you're going to make money. So we kind of take a guess in high school as to how we think we're going to make money. And then we go off and spend more money than we've ever spent on this one person to get a college education. And I Googled it earlier today, and I saw a figure like the average college education is about $35,000, and I think that's probably a really low number. And that's probably a public college. But so we figured out what we think we might want to do, and then we go spend $35,000 plus in 4 years of our life going and learning how to do that thing. And then we go out and we see if anybody wants to pay us to do that thing that we just learned how to do. And unfortunately today, the answer is usually no. It's a tough market for kids that are graduating from college. But let's say like somebody says yes, I'll pay you to do that thing that you've learned how to do, accounting or computer science or whatever that may be. Well, what happens then is that according to statistics, 80% of us, 80% of Americans don't like what they do for a living. So 80% of Americans get up 5 days a week, spend more like, by the time you drive, more like 50, 55 hours going somewhere and doing something that they don't like. And we do this for the biggest chunk of our life, like 45 years. Where we spend most of our time going and doing this thing that we don't like. And we take the time that we have left over, which is maybe a couple hours in the evenings, weekends, those sacred 2 weeks of vacation. And that's when we do the things that we love and the things that we care about. And we defer all of our enjoyment to retirement, when unfortunately we're too old to enjoy ourselves. And that's kind of a dismal picture, but that's kind of the world that we live in. I did that. I went through grade school, college, and it was pretty much the same story. I couldn't stand it because they kept trying to teach me things that I didn't care about. So it took me about 13 years to get through college, and I eventually did. But I got kind of lucky in the late 90s, and that all you had to do was kind of read a couple of computer books and you could get a job in technology. So that's what I did. I read a couple of computer books and I got a job in technology. And I had a very successful career. I worked my way up. I ended up managing large technology programs for a couple of major financial institutions. And I had a really successful and good technology career. And it was good. I had everything that you're supposed to want. I had a career, I had a good salary, there was room for advancement. I had it all, except for one thing, and that's happiness. So I knew that I had to do something different. I knew that that wasn't going to be what was going to make me happy. And I always kind of knew, almost on kind of a visceral level, that I needed to start my own business. I needed to become an entrepreneur, because it was something I'd been interested in for a very long time. But the problem was, I just couldn't figure out how. Because I had this big life, this big house, and expensive lifestyle that required this big paycheck that I worked for. So how on earth do you do that? How do you get out from under that and move over and do something different? Well, the decision that I made was that I was going to figure it out. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I decided that I was going to figure it out. And after a lot of reading and attending a lot of conferences and seminars and a lot of research and training and all of that, I figured out how to do it. And on April, as John mentioned, April of 2012, I left the corporate world forever and started my business. And what I learned on that journey was that entrepreneurship is very different than what we think of it. When we look at entrepreneurship, we think a lot of things about it that aren't true. And tonight I want to share with you those 3 things that you can do to quit working that job that you don't like and create a life of freedom. But before I get into that, I want to bust 3 myths. Because there's 3 big myths about entrepreneurship that everybody believes are true, but none of them are true. So the first one, I'm sorry, my cards got messed up. I just needed this in front of me. The first one is that you have to take a big risk. You know, it's like you have to just decide you're going to do it and just leap and hope for the best. In other words, you have to take out a big mortgage on your house. You have to sink your life savings into the whole thing and maybe even get a bunch of venture capital. And then you have to charge forward and hope like hell that it works. And that's not true at all. Because there's actually ways, and I'm going to talk about this, but there's ways to go out and figure out what people want and what people would pay for and what you could actually sell and be successful with. And we're going to talk about that when we get into the 3 things that you can do. So the second big myth, so the first one is you got to take a big risk. The second big myth is that it's all about the idea. So the myth is that I have to have this brilliant idea in my head in order to start a business. And if I have a great idea, I'm going to have a successful business. Well, neither of those things are true. Because you actually don't need an idea. And if you have an idea, that can be really dangerous. Because you end up getting married to the idea, and you don't even know if the market wants it. I have a weekly show. I interview successful entrepreneurs. I've been doing it since April of this year. And it's called the How to Quit Working Show. And I ask every single guest on that show, what is the biggest mistake that you made? And the answers are across the board. But by far, the answer that I get the most often is that they had an idea that they pursued without knowing if anybody really wanted it. So it's not about the idea. In fact, if you have an idea, you should probably just forget about it. And if you don't have an idea, don't worry about it. Because we're going to talk about how to figure out what that idea should be. And the last big myth about entrepreneurship is that it's really hard. And it's actually not hard at all. It just requires commitment and persistence. I think a lot of people think that it's way harder than it is, and there's a lot of people who really aren't that smart who are very successful entrepreneurs. In fact, I think that I don't have kids, and I think that raising kids, if any of you have done that, which I know a number of you have, it's way, way harder. Way harder. So those are the three big myths about entrepreneurship, and I wanted to start by just blowing out of the water. So next, I'm going to give you another way of thinking about entrepreneurship and thinking about what it means to have a business. So what entrepreneurship is about is it's not about this big complicated thing that only people like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Steve Jobs do. It's really just figuring out what is the value that you have that you can provide the world, and then providing that value to the world in exchange for money. It's really that simple. And that's a great segue into the three things that you can do to stop working that job that you don't like. Number one, the very first thing, is figure out what value you have and who needs that value. And the way that I like to frame this up is I like to ask folks to ask yourself a question. So when somebody calls you up, maybe it's your friends or your family or colleagues or whoever, and they ask for your help with something. They call you up and they say, Mary, can you help me with this? John, can you come over and look at that? Matt, can you tell me what you think about this other thing? What is that thing? What is that thing that people call you up and ask you for your help with? And I've had this conversation, I've given this talk enough times to know what you might be thinking right now. And what I think you might be thinking is, well, yeah, people call me and ask me about how to have a greener lawn, or how I raise such polite, well-behaved kids, or whatever it is. But I'm not the world's foremost expert on that. A lot of people know way more than I do. So how can I do anything with that? Well, the answer is you don't have to be the world's foremost expert on that thing. You only have to know more than about 90% of the population about it. I'm not the world's foremost expert on entrepreneurship. But I am standing up here talking because I do know more than probably 95% of the population about what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur and run a successful business. And that's all it takes. The other thing that I like to tell people when they challenge me on that is, if you look around, you can look around this room, or do it anytime you're in a restaurant or a crowded place. If you look around and just ask yourself, on that thing that people ask me about, who's the most knowledgeable person in this room? And if you can look around and say, I probably know more than about 90% of people in this room, then you're onto something. So don't undervalue what you know. Don't undervalue what you know, because in researching my book, I talked to well over 100, probably closer to 200 entrepreneurs. And it was another thing that they told me is never undervalue what you know. Because many of them felt like if they had had more confidence and they had had the gumption to move forward sooner and faster. I actually talked to this woman, her name's Sherry Fink. She wrote a series of children's books. She's now a best-selling children's author. Her books are being adapted to plays. And I asked her, I said, Sherry, what's the biggest mistake that you made? And she said, I moved too slow. The biggest mistake was I didn't move fast enough. So don't undervalue what you know. So step number one is figure out what it is, what value you provide to the world. Number two, and who needs that value? Number two, start a conversation about that topic. And there's a lot of ways to start that conversation. You can start that conversation on social media. You can start that in local networking groups or trade associations. If, for example, you have been involved in successfully starting a Montessori charter school. You could begin talking about that at organizations that are concerned about Montessori or charter schools, or maybe speaking at those organizations, as I know Kristen does. So start that conversation. And the reason that you're starting that conversation is to figure out what is it that these people really are struggling with and need your help with. So as you talk to these people, are they struggling with how do I figure out how to get funding for my school early on? Right? So if you've raised these amazing, polite, and well-behaved children, and you begin speaking to people at parenting groups, it doesn't mean speaking on stage necessarily. That could just mean speaking to them, right, in a social setting. You begin speaking to them, and you find that, gosh, everybody just seems to have a heck of a time getting their kids to go to sleep at night. So you're figuring out what are these things that people need help with, and how can you help them with that? So step number 1, figure out what value you add to the world. Step number 2, start a conversation about it. And step number 3 is create something that addresses that situation. And this doesn't have to be something that you charge money for. This can just be something very simple, like a video that you put up online, or a document that you provide that maybe outlines the 6 things that you should do with your children before you put them to bed at night to make them go to sleep. Or the 3 people that you should talk to get funding for your school in the early stages. So create that piece of value that addresses their concerns. And that's why you were listening to what are their problems, that you can come back with that thing that addresses those problems. And as you're having these conversations and as you're providing this thing out to them, make sure that you're capturing their contact information. Using whatever means it is, this Excel spreadsheet at the back of the napkin, it doesn't matter what it is, but capturing their names and their email addresses and their addresses and connecting with them on social media so that you can stay involved and active and keep that conversation going. And if you do that for 3 to 6 months, something's going to happen. Something's going to shift, and that people are going to start to look to you for information around that topic. People are going to start to look to you as the authority on that topic, or as an authority on that topic. And they're going to ask you more questions. And they're going to say, you know what, Andrea, that document that you gave is so awesome, but I really need some more information in this area. And that's where you're starting to see where products fall out. And that's where you'll start to create products and things. Products or services or things that you'll sell for actual money. Now that was a crash course. That was very, very fast. But there's a lot more information in my book and in the How to Quit Working Now program, which I'm going to be telling you how you can get that in a moment, as well as how you can help City Garden Montessori School. And I wanted to turn it over to John to talk about the school in a second, but before I do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about my vision for the world and why I'm standing here launching my new book at City Garden Montessori School instead of anywhere else. You know, I talked about that whole path where we start off as kids and go to high school, talk with a career counselor, and figure out what we're going to do, spend how much money on college, and then hate our lives for 45 years and then retire when we're too old to enjoy it. Well, I have a different vision for the world. And my vision for the world is that kids, when they're born with so much wonder and excitement. And my dream is that we nourish that and that we let them figure out what the things are that they love and what they are really interested And we nourish that, and we help them go along through their education and figure out how that thing that they love so much helps the world. And then when they become adults, they continue to take that to the world. And they get paid money for it. So now their life is centered around that thing that they love to do and that thing that they're interested in, instead of being centered around that job that 80% of us don't like. So with that, there's two things that are going to get us that vision. The first one is entrepreneurship, which I talked about, and the second one is education, which John is going to talk about. John, tell us a little bit about City Garden Montessori School. What do you guys do here, and why is it so awesome?
Thanks. And thanks, Jeff, again, for that, and for holding your book launch here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, we're here at City Garden Montessori School. Have you guys heard of us before? Raise your hand. Cool. And for whom is this the first time that you've heard of us? Come on, Zach. Okay. And for whom is it the first time that you're in the room, in the building? Great. So, City Garden started as a small preschool, basically in this neighborhood in the late 90s. And for many years, it ran and had one classroom, basically, of students, so 30 or less students. And it produced great graduates at the kindergarten level who had had a Montessori training in a diverse environment, in a diverse neighborhood, in an urban setting. And over time in St. Louis, there's been more Montessori education available, and other times there's been less. And recently, it's been quite hard to get Montessori certified education in the city. And I'll talk about why that's important a little bit later. But essentially, a group of parents who had put their children into this preschool and enjoyed what their children were getting out of it, enjoyed the creativity and the focus that they saw their children performing every day, went to the person who's running the school, Trish Curtis, the founder, and said, we'd really like to have an opportunity like this that goes all the way through at least 6th grade, but probably through 8th grade. Because in this neighborhood, you can either go to a public school that is 99% black and maybe like 95% free and reduced lunch, or you can go to a private school, which is 90% white and about 100% middle and upper middle class. So there wasn't an opportunity really for students who live in this neighborhood, which by U.S. Census data is one of the most integrated neighborhoods in the United States. There's not an opportunity to go to a grade school where all of those populations mix together, where we have people from all socioeconomic backgrounds and levels. We have people from all racial backgrounds. And there certainly wasn't a Montessori opportunity. So parents seeing that, let's see, how do we do this? Having seen an idea and having seen a value produced in the community, began a conversation about what's going to happen. How are we going to provide this for our children in an ongoing way? And the founder, Trish Curtis, had heard of charter schools. They've been allowed in Missouri now for, I think, 13 years. Is that right? Give or take? Something like that. They've been around in the United States for about 22 years. They made it to Missouri about 13 years ago. And what that would do is it would give us the opportunity to receive public funding to continue to do this all the way up through 8th grade, thereby making it available to the majority of the folks in this neighborhood. So after several attempts at starting the conversation with SLU, SLU decided to, St. Louis University, decided to be our chartering sponsor. So the Missouri Department of Education gives SLU the right to charter us as an organization, as a grade school, and then they both hold us accountable, essentially. So from there on out, we had our charter. Some funds were raised, and we started with a beginning student body of 54 students. Yeah. And sorry, Christy was there through all of it. I started 3 years ago, so I know some of the story, but I wasn't there for all of it. Thanks. And from there on out, we've grown basically by a kindergarten classroom, so 30 students per year. We'll continue doing that. We now have grade school all the way up through, or preschool, excuse me, all the way up through 8th grade. We have 245 students right now receiving a Montessori education. So, Montessori, why is that important? Essentially, Montessori I'm going to give you two facts that I think are very interesting that I found very exciting when I started working here and began to get more into the history of the school. The Montessori learning philosophy was started in the early 1900s in the slums of Rome by Dr. Maria Montessori, who was one of the first female Italian physicians. And she got her start working with children who were differently abled, which at the time honestly could have stood for anything, including just that they were from poor families and didn't have access to high quality education. So she worked with these students, realized that under the right circumstances, they could all perform well, and they could all do well on standardized testing. And from there started several schools in which she was always focused on what was working for the child in terms of their education. And so anytime that there was a problem, anytime that a child struggled with education, anytime that it was boring or frustrating or too hard, she assumed that the problem was with the teacher or the environment or the way the lesson was set up and not with the child. And in doing so, she created an incredibly child-friendly pedagogy, an incredibly child-friendly philosophy, and then a curriculum, and then materials from that. And essentially, that system is what is Montessori. And it is, at this point, the largest pedagogy in the world. It's in hundreds of countries, and there are right now about 22,000 Montessori schools operating across the globe. And what it does, essentially, is it allows the child, through a carefully cycled curriculum, to approach each topic and each concept at the time that's right for them. So a definition that I'm using right now that I like is that we're trying to provide the right education. So the right education is the right teacher, teaching the right concept at the right time, in the right environment, to the right student, in the right way. Because who could argue with that being the right education? If every child had that kind of individualized educational curriculum available to them, then it could never be boring, because it would always be right. It could never be too hard. And all of these struggles that we have with our standardized education system, many of them might just disappear. And our students might be able to learn focus, to develop their internal drive, rather than to be managed to do work that they're not interested in. And to give that gift to a child, to allow them to pursue their education based on what they're interested in, at a pace that is right for them, in an environment that's supportive of that, regardless of whether or not they need to socialize, or work by themselves, or work in a small group to feel comfortable expanding the boundaries of their knowledge. And then, so that's Montessori. So we talked a little bit about the growth, a little bit about what Montessori can do for students, and then the other thing that I like to talk about here, and this is kind of why I'm here, is that I came to St. Louis in 2003 to go to St. Louis University from Omaha, Nebraska. While I was there, I volunteered in many grade schools across the St. Louis metro area, and not once did I end up in a school like this. So when I came to City Garden for the first time and saw the student population that they had, saw that it basically touches every demographic that lives in the city, which I, again, hadn't seen in any other public institution, and that the parent community was as deeply involved as they are. If you visit us during a school day, you'll notice there's usually at least one parent in every classroom, and that we have a tiny parking lot. Some of you guys noticed. We fill up that entire block on both sides during the day with parent cars because they're in here, making sure that their children are getting the education that they need, volunteering to help fill the gaps that we have, and making sure that this is as supportive of a place as it can be for children. And so to come into that kind of community, to see that this kind of education working for this population is pretty inspiring. And it's interesting work to be doing. I think it's really good work for the St. Louis metro area to have ideally many institutions where people from all backgrounds are actually mixing. Because while this is one of the most integrated environments in neighborhoods in the United States, there are still somewhat parallel but distinct tracks that people go through depending on their racial background, depending on their economic status. That's not maybe as true as it used to be, but it's still not like we live in an integrated America. And for us to have the opportunity to do work to see if we can move the needle on that, I think is pretty incredible. So again, that's the really short story about how City Garden came to be and what we are today. And I'd be happy to take questions. I am going to hand it back over to Jeff if there are not questions, and he'll tell us more about his book and his program. And then we'll all be around to mingle afterwards too. So, any questions? Otherwise, yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Well, I think you can see why, when I describe to you what I want to see the world look like, why we're here at City Garden. So I know that what I talked about and what John talked about may have resonated with some of you. And I wanted to extend a special offer to you all and do so in a way that can benefit City Garden as well. So I have an online training program, which is for sale on my website for $497. And what I'm going to do tonight only is I'm going to offer that at $100. And for that $100, I'm going to just go through a couple of the things that you'll accomplish if you go through this online training program. All right. So the first thing you're going to do is we talked about discovering what you have, what you know that can benefit other people. We're going to go through a much more detailed process to discover exactly what that is and how it can be monetized. You're also going to open a dialogue and build a list, a prospect list of people who are already interested in buying what you have to offer before you even create it. You're going to use that dialogue to be certain that you figure out exactly what people want and create something that is exactly what they need and exactly what they can't wait to buy. And then you're going to sell it. It shows you how to set up online launch sequences or do anything like that that you want to get that product out in front of the people who are interested in it. And then once the money starts rolling in, that's when you get to structure your life and structure your business in a way that your business supports your life, not the other way around. So we don't have that 45-year gap. Got to get rid of that. So that's 6 training modules, downloadable MP3s of each session, a 30-minute session with me. We'll talk on the phone, or we can even do it over lunch, and be able to show me your coursework, and I'll give you my feedback. We'll discuss it, provide any help that I can there, as well as a workbook shipped to your house. Includes all the exercises, so there's worksheets. Building this business is just a matter of filling out these worksheets. It's a really cool process that I put together. An online question and answer forum for a full 6 months where you can ask any question that you have and interact with other folks who are involved in the program. And there's 2 bonuses to that. The first one is what I call the Technology Master Plan. So as some of you might be thinking, oh, there's so much technical setup stuff involved with this. What do I do? How do I do that? Well, I've got a full Technology Master Plan that outlines your choices at different price points tell you exactly what you need to do. There. The other bonus is the thing that I am most excited about. It's called the Move the Earth module. So I'm also a certified high-performance coach. I've gone through a certification of the high-performance methodology that basically has taken all of the tools and techniques, the mindsets and the methods that have been used by the most successful entrepreneurs, politicians, CEOs, athletes, and celebrities, and figuring out how do they think and act differently than everyone else to achieve all the success that they've achieved. And we packaged that up into a 6-week program as well that is included with this. I call it the Move the Earth module, because if you have all this stuff, you can literally stand up and push the earth wherever you want it to go. It's amazing stuff. I just came back from a conference in California a couple weeks ago where I met with all of the high-performance coaches. And, just some amazing, amazing stuff in terms of the results that those folks and myself were able to get for clients using these ideas and these tools and techniques. So that's an amazing program. Obviously, we're going to throw in, since this is a book launch, the $100 also gets you a copy of my book. Be happy to autograph it. And the audio program, Create a Life of Freedom and Flexibility with What You Know. So pop that in your CD. It's in your car CD player. It's about 50 minutes long. So with that, the $100 benefits City Garden. They get 100% of that, and I am taking on the cost of the CD as well as the delivery and the book and stuff. So,
Thanks, Jeff.
thank you.
Thanks.